Well, there's more bad news for the news media in New Zealand. Yeah, I mean, usually when you get bad news, you adjust your behaviour or your health choices or your actions. But in the case of the mainstream media in New Zealand, they will likely ignore this study and its implications, carry on as usual, and continue to tank, go broke, lose jobs, sadly. But they can't say they weren't warned. Let's check out the study. Now, firstly, let me just remind you about the most recent study on media bias. The fifth report about trust in news in Aotearoa, New Zealand, was produced by the AUT Research Centre for Journalism, Media and Democracy, and it was in collaboration with the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. It's based on a survey of 11 questions, most of which mirror those asked by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, Reuters, and its international survey. And last year, the Reuters Institute conducted a survey of 46 countries across Europe, the Americas, Asia Pacific and Africa, and our international comparisons about news interest, news avoidance, consumption, trust, and news payments are made against this group. Now, in 2024, 15 New Zealand news brands were included in this New Zealand study, and it was carried out in February of this year. What did it show for New Zealand mainstream media news? Well, it wasn't good at all. Not at all. In 2020, 53% of New Zealanders trusted news in general. In 2024, this year, it's at 33%. In 5 years, trust has plummeted 20 percentage points. Just 1 in 3 New Zealanders trust the news media. Even for news that we consume and go to first, for the first time, less than half of us trust even our preferred news site, 45%. Now, internationally, we're competing with the UK and the US for the lowest levels of trust. And the survey also found that based on the proportion of news consumers who say they avoid the news often or sometimes, guess who's at the top? Yep, that's us in the blue there, New Zealand. But here's the interesting thing. New Zealanders are actually very interested in news. Good news. You can see that in the graph there. Here's the age breakdown of interest. Once you reach the age of 55, apparently you're supposed to be more interested in the news. So, I mean, Kiwis are interested in reliable news sources. The problem is finding it amongst our current legacy media. And the New Zealand media seem to be refusing to listen to the feedback. But here's the key graph, in my view, from that AUT report. The top 4 reasons that we're not trusting the news, and they've all increased in the last 12 months. The reporting in the news is biased, not balanced. News is too much a result of the political leaning of the newsroom. The news is too opinionated and lacks factual information. There is a lack of transparency in the way the news media operates. And notice the 5th one down there, which I haven't highlighted in yellow. 61% say government financial support for the media in New Zealand means you cannot trust journalists to hold the government to account. Now, approximately 84% of respondents were concerned about fake news, 92% were concerned about poor journalism, and poor journalism was defined as making factual mistakes, dumbed down stories, and misleading headlines, clickbait. 96% of respondents, almost all of us, were concerned about stories where facts are spun or twisted to push a particular agenda. Wow, that is damning. So how did the media elite respond to this AUT report? Well, the report quotes newsroom co-editor Mark Jennings, who said, "In my 22 years as head of TV3 News and 7 years as co-editor of Newsroom, I've seen the public trust in the media decline to a point where it is impacting our democracy." No, actually, I'd say it this way. I've seen the media decline to a point where it's impacting our democracy. It's not the public trust affecting democracy, it's the quality of media. Now, the New Zealand Herald editorial did some gaslighting and said, "With big world events like the US election just months away, we're likely to see a flood of disinformation hitting social media and further eroding people's trust in news media. AI tools, which sure can be used for good things, could also become a powerful weapon in spreading disinformation. All of this is coming at us fast, and it's urgent that everyone has the media literacy skills required to tell the difference between real and fake news. We know the difference between real and fake news. Read the room, New Zealand Herald editors, read the room. And stop blaming social media. It's been around for decades. Now, One News in their coverage of this AUT research quoted one of the researchers who made this very telling comment. Journalism has lost its authority as the main source of news and information. In general, people distrust the information they see, and they are increasingly checking their facts themselves. This phenomenon is highly problematic. That's from the Research Centre co-director. And much of this decline is happening because many Kiwis can see for themselves the extreme bias coming from an increasingly woke media and their selective use of information to support certain progressive agendas. Many people also believe the media had become mostly a marketing and PR department for the previous government and were compromised by the government funding. And that's what it shows in the survey. And the numbers also show that it's not just right-wing people turning off because it's left-wing or left-wing turning off because it's right-wing. It's both. It's not anti-mandate people or people who didn't want the vaccine or climate change deniers or TERFs or white people. This survey is showing that Kiwis from all sides have had enough. 2 in 3 Kiwis are saying do better. So, over the weekend, a news survey was reported. It was entitled Selective and Consistent News Avoidance in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Motivations and Demographic Influences. And it was by academics from Victoria University and University of Otago. Now, according to the op-ed by the authors in eveningreport.nz, a new website that has popped up, new news website, it says this. Previous research has found news avoidance is increasing around the world. But New Zealanders have also shown something of a love-hate relationship with the news. Avoidance rates are high, but so too is general interest in the news. At the same time, trust in the media has been steadily declining. To make sense of this, we surveyed 1,204 people in New Zealand in February 2023. We asked about news avoidance and the motivation for it, and recorded demographic details such as age, gender, and political belief. And here's what they found. So, 60% of the survey participants reported that they sometimes, often, or almost always avoid the news. Now, if you add in the rarely there, just to the left, what is that, 19.8%, if you add in that, basically it's saying that 81% of us avoid the news to some extent. Now, this is slightly lower than the AUT study, which followed the Reuters methodology. They put the figure at 69% last year and 75% this year. But remember, this new study that we're doing right now was actually surveyed at the beginning of last year. So things have got worse, quite likely. So 60% may be being generous. It possibly is higher. But this total of 60%, which is what is in the red square there, is higher than any other national figure reported in other studies, with Greece and Bulgaria the next highest at 57%, Argentina at 46%. Japan has the lowest turn-off rates, 11%, only 11% say that they avoid the news, followed by Taiwan 17% and Denmark 19%. The average across 46 countries surveyed by Reuters was 32%. The average. We're almost double that. Yep, we have some of the highest rates of news avoidance in the world. But here's a key bit. The average for almost always avoiding the news, in other words, consistently avoiding the news, is 3%, and a high of 10%, we're on 13%, way higher. Now, women reported higher rates of news avoidance than men, and the authors say in the op-ed, the reason for this, this could be due to a legacy of unequal access to news and a perceived lack of diverse voices in New Zealand's news production, causing some to feel the news just isn't for them. Have they watched the news lately? There's plenty of female reporters and presenters, political correspondents, newsreaders, Māori, Pacifica. I'm not quite sure what news the authors are watching or reading. We also found that people with far left or far right political beliefs were more likely to avoid the news than those with centrist views. Those nearer the ends of the political spectrum are less likely to find their views represented in major news outlets and therefore seek alternative news sources that support their worldviews. Now, I touched on this. There are two types of avoidance according to the study. There is selective news avoidance, which is that strategic practice where you avoid certain news programs or certain reporters. And there is consistent news avoidance, which is, basically you boycott. You don't watch the news at all. Which one are you? Are you selective or are you consistent? Now, the authors in this paper, this new paper, which is published in the New Zealand Journal of Social Sciences Online, says that New Zealand is slightly unique. They say, with a population of only 5 million people, there is arguably less national day-to-day news to follow in New Zealand compared to the news in more populated countries. That's true. There is also no 24/7 news cycle. And the major news organisations, Stuff, New Zealand, NZME and TVNZ, are not as overtly partisan as media in the US, for example, Fox News versus MSNBC, the UK, the Times or the Telegraph versus the Guardian, or Australia, the Australian versus ABC. Stuff, NZME, TVNZ, not overtly partisan? Once again, the authors aren't reading the room. Maybe that's why they're surprised by these results. The mainstream media, when we say NZME, we're talking about New Zealand Herald and News Talk ZB, and you've also got Radio New Zealand should be in there as well. The mainstream media is overwhelmingly left-wing. In fact, this study, this latest study quotes a US study that says in the United States, those with right-wing political beliefs are far more likely to avoid the news because they think it is untrustworthy. They're right. I mean, the recent presidential debates have proven beyond all doubt how deeply biased and left-wing the mainstream media is over there. Now, interestingly, the Reuters study last year found that those with right-wing beliefs in the US were 5 times more likely to actively avoid news about climate change than those on the left, and 3 times more likely to avoid news about social justice issues such as gender and race. Those on the left are more likely than those on the right to avoid news about crime or business and finance. And is the avoidance age-specific? Well, the study actually talks about this. It says younger individuals, particularly those in Gen Z and millennial demographics, so that's 16 to 27 and 28 to 45, so that's basically anyone under 45, are more likely to avoid traditional news sources in favour of social media and other digital platforms. In New Zealand, the age group that is most interested in the news, which is 55 to 64, we're most interested in the news, are also the group most likely to selectively avoid the news. And they said the research found that men and women may avoid the news for different reasons, with women more likely to avoid the news because it made them feel sad or depressed. So, here's the key question. Why are we avoiding the news? Either selectively or consistently. Well, the main reason given for news avoidance is the negative effect news has on mood, up the top there, 32%. Second most popular reason was a perception of the news being untrustworthy or biased, 30%. And the research said that people with right-wing political beliefs were more likely to cite this. And the authors actually comment on that and say, this suggests a decline in trust might be more about right-wing audiences perceiving a left-wing bias in the media rather than a general distrust of the New Zealand media overall. Well, that's spot on. Roughly a quarter of the respondents there, third one down, said that the news is too sensationalist, 25%. And again, the authors comment on this one. They say, ironically, the use of clickbait and alarming headlines to engage audiences may be driving them away in the competitive attention economy. Now, the authors draw a couple conclusions. They say, despite high news avoidance rates, voter turnout at the general election last year was 78%. So just because you're not watching the news doesn't mean you avoid civic participation. That's good. Instead of consuming traditional news, many are turning to YouTube, social media, and blogs, which often lack the more rigorous journalistic standards applied by mainstream media. Okay, no additional comment there. They continue. It might be easy to conclude New Zealand's high rate of news avoidance are an implicit criticism of the media themselves. But this is to overlook the nature of their work and the immense challenges the media face. Holding governments to account and covering crises or divisive issues can be an unpopular and thankless task. Blaming the messenger is perhaps an understandable response. Our findings also highlight the difficulty of satisfying an increasingly polarised news audience with diverse groups perceiving bias and untrustworthiness differently. It's nearly impossible to keep everyone happy. Well, maybe be balanced and keep both sides happy, like you used to manage. I mean, I'm happy to hear a counter view, but I also need to know that my view is at least being heard so that viewers can come to their own conclusion rather than being told what to think. Now, there was just one other thing that I noticed in the report that maybe the authors didn't pick up on. If you look at the right-hand side where I've put the red square, you will see that the main reason that people often avoid the news, so those are the light blue bars, is because of the negative effect on their mood. See up the top there, the light blue bar goes out the furthest. But look at the dark blue bars. These are the consistent avoiders, the boycotters, the ones who have left the room. What are their main reasons? Well, the main reason, second one down, the news is untrustworthy or biased, 61%. And then the news has a negative effect on my mood, 45% up the top. And then third one down, the news is too sensationalistic, 42%. These are the main reasons that the consistent news avoiders give as a reason for not watching the news. That's the group that aren't watching any mainstream media because of unworthiness, bias, sensationalism, and the negative mood they experience because of it. And I can totally relate to that. Now, unfortunately, I have to watch the news for research purposes. It's part of the job so that you don't have to watch it. But if the media want these people back, these are the categories they need to fix. And that's what the authors actually say in their conclusion. They say New Zealanders avoid the news because of the impact on mental health and perceived qualities of untrustworthiness and bias, especially for older people or people with right-wing political views. Let me conclude with what I always say when discussing this issue. This report should be a wake-up call to the media if they want to avoid going bust, but sadly, I suspect it won't be. Their desire to push an agenda outweighs their desire to survive. Individually, there are some fantastic committed journalists with integrity, but as an industry as a whole, it's corrupt, broken, and on its knees. Will it get back up again? I just don't know. And as someone who was involved in the media, it is very sad to watch that we've got to this point. The good news is that there are now lots of alternatives, and you're watching one of them. So it's not all bad news.